This is Ben Woodford here at Modern Education Radio Hour on 90.1 KZSU Stanford. This is a show where we dig into everything from current research trends to far-out ideas concerning any topic even remotely related to education. I'm Ben Woodford, your host here in the studio. I'll be with you every Friday from 3 to 4 p.m. for your commute. Here at Modern Education, we bring cutting-edge ideas, philosophical discussions, insights from experts, and just about everything else you want to know. The goal is to help listeners interact with and understand learning in all its forms. If you have questions or suggestions for the show, you can tweet at BenWoodford1 on Twitter. I'll do my best to include your ideas in future shows. If you're a teacher, parent, student, or anyone interested in our collective future, I hope you'll tune in each week as we examine new ideas and interview guests from a variety of backgrounds. Today, we'll be talking about education with my guest, Dr. Amy Fast. She's calling into the studio from Oregon, I believe. I'm going to bring Dr. Fast on the line, and we're going to hear from her in our segment today. Dr. Fast, are you with me?
I'm here.
All right. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate you making the time to come on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. So, Dr. Fast, for our listeners, could you just give us a little rundown on your experience in education and your background coming into this?
Sure. I started right out of college when I was 21 as a fifth grade teacher. And for 10 years, I taught fourth and fifth grade in obviously elementary school. And then after that, I was hired as an instructional coach in the same district where I worked with elementary and middle school teachers to improve their practice. And then as I was an instructional coach, I was kind of recruited by the high school in our district to apply for the assistant principal position there. And I didn't know that I wanted to be an administrator, but I had gotten my doctorate and wrapped in admin classes kind of while I was doing that. And was really jazzed about following some of the students I taught all the way through middle school and high school, which is maybe a little creepy, but I've gotten to follow a lot of them for the past, 18 years almost of their experience. And so that's been pretty cool. And so I couldn't resist the opportunity to get to serve as their high school principal. So this is my third year as a curriculum assistant principal at McMinnville High School in McMinnville, Oregon. It's a large comprehensive high school of 2,200 students, and it's been a huge learning experience for me and super fun.
Oh, I'm sure. There's never a dull moment in high school, is there?
No.
And don't worry, I don't think your students would think it's creepy at all that you're helping them learn for a good chunk of their learning lives so far. Right. That's great. That's great. It's fun. So you have a book too, I understand.
I do.
So it's the mission, not the mandates, defining the purpose of public education.
Correct.
I love the title. I read a little bit of the book, actually, just trying to figure out what you're about. But I'd love if you could tell our listeners just what your book is about, the vision that you're trying to paint for us, and just...
Yeah, so when I was writing the book, I didn't actually know it was going to be a book, but I had, as part of it was my dissertation at the time, and I didn't want to do a traditional dissertation. I just wanted to, write a giant argumentative essay basically on where I thought education should go. And I was lucky enough to have a dissertation chair that allowed me to do that. And then he, as part of my dissertation defense, convinced me that in order to get the grade, I also needed to go through the practice of submitting it to a publisher, just because in case I ever wanted to write a book, I'd have that experience. And so I did that as kind of a hoop. Like I just submitted it to one publisher, and I was surprised that they responded with a book contract. So that was kind of cool. In retrospect, if I had known it was going to be a book, there's a lot of other things I think I would have wanted to say. But the gist is practicing educators' viewpoint as well as the 30,000 foot range. Someone who's done a lot of research on the purpose of public education. I'm basically trying to uncover what is the most noble, most important purpose for public education in our country in order to not only serve the greater society, but serve individual students as best as we can. And that's the premise of the book. And I had a gut feeling when I was writing it, but I didn't really have an idea of where I would wind up in terms of claim I was making our thesis, but
well, that's the writing process, right? We never
It is
know
the
where it's
writing
going to end up.
yeah. But it was really affirming when my research and my gut lined up in the end. And I think that for those who have read my book, I think that it is affirming in that I really try to look at all of the lenses through which we can define education and give validity to all those various lenses. But in the end, we have to have a common purpose, and that's, I think, the premise of writing the book. Is I even just working within one district, my whole almost 20 years of public education experiences, I find that most of our struggle lies in the times when there are multiple stakeholders with multiple different purposes, and that's something that I wanted to kind of get to the bottom of.
Wow. So you painted a picture in this book of what you thought the best situation would be for both educators and students. Is that right?
Correct.
Is there a way you could give us
That's what I tried to do anyway.
Right.
I don't know if I succeeded, but that was my attempt, yes.
Well, at least the publishers thought you did something right there. Is there something that you could paint a small picture for the audience of what you think education should look like going into the future?
Yeah, so my conceptual framework that I landed on is best illustrated in this triple Venn diagram that's in the book, and it's what I call, for lack of a better term, the sweet spot of success. And so it's the intersection of academic achievement, because I don't want to undermine the importance of academics and learning. It's huge, but also the intersection of that plus students' soft skills, or you can call them non-cognitive skills or 21st century skills, whatever it is that has been shown to make future employees successful in whatever business endeavors they have. That the intersection of academic achievement, soft skills, and then intrinsic drive. I think one of the pieces that we're completely missing the boat on in public education is the intrinsic drive of our students. And so I call the sweet spot of success the intersection of those three endeavors. And I'm not someone who is a proponent of having no measures of success in public education. I think that sometimes we're guilty of over measuring and measuring the wrong thing. And so kind of what I argue is that we should be looking at how to assess how we're doing at the intersection of all of those areas. And if we can find a way to measure academics as well as the seemingly intangible aspects of education, then we can kind of try to right ourselves on that track of how we're doing towards achieving our purpose, if that is our purpose. And another thing that I might be known for those people that I collaborate with or that follow me on social media is I'm a big proponent of student voice. And oftentimes people say, these things can't be measured. And it's as simple sometimes as asking the students. And that's a sufficient measure in my mind. And so that's another piece that I talk a lot about in my book.
Yeah, those are some great points. The idea of assessing certain qualities in education is essentially a practice in defining what we value.
Exactly.
So when we put all this emphasis on these standardized tests, we're saying this is the only thing that matters. And that
Correct.
Comes out in the classroom, it comes out in administration, it comes out in the way textbooks are written.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You nailed it. That's exactly right. And whether we like it or not, what we test is what gets taught. And assessment is important. It helps us know how we're doing. But if we're assessing too much of one thing at the expense of another, or if we're assessing the wrong thing entirely, then we're going to be putting all our eggs into a basket that's not going to bear fruit at the end. Like, it's not going to be something that's crucial for the outcomes that we're hoping for in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way of putting it. And I think it's really nice, I think, for parents and teachers to hear this kind of discussion happening. because we all value these things so much in terms of wanting our own children to succeed, but we sometimes miss the big picture that doesn't mean they're succeeding, or it doesn't mean they're a whole person that's ready to face the world in the way we would hope for them.
Right.
Yeah. So I have just sort of a random question here, which I think ties in nicely. If you could wave a magic wand right now and change just one facet of the educational system that you're working in or that you're used to seeing, what do you think that would be?
Well, that's a really hard question.
Oh, good.
First magic wand I'd wave would be giving educators the respect, recognition, and money they deserve. That would be the very first thing I'd wave, I think.
There's a million teachers that just fell in love with you.
Another big thing, I think, if I could wave a magic wand, would be family and community engagement. That's still something that, as a high school administrator, I have not been successful at, and I rack my brain for new innovative ways to make that happen. And then thirdly, I'm just going to throw social promotion out there.
What do you mean by that?
Social promotion is the practice of advancing students from grade to grade based on their age. And I think the reason I throw social promotion out there is because it's one of those things that locks us into this archaic system that we have created. And if we disrupt that, we disrupt the whole system and can kind of rethink things. And so that might be right now, my top three. I'm sure when I wake up in the morning, I'll have thought of a new top three, but that's off the top of my head.
That's great. Yeah. There is definitely an entrenched idea about every student should be with their peers. Right. And I think that really flies in the face of educational theory. If you think of the zone of proximal development as a way to escalate someone's understanding by being around someone more knowledgeable than them.
Right. And it gets really tricky, especially when you say that education you propose that it's not solely about academics, because then how do we group students? And I don't claim to have the answer to that, but I just, I think the desire to kind of shake up the system and rattle it a bit is where I throw in that number three.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a difficult thing to tread lightly with, because sometimes shaking up something that is there already can be detrimental to everybody, and that's a fine line to walk. But I appreciate the idea that we really do need to be thinking big picture here, which leads me to my next question, actually. If you could think 20 years from now, and understanding how fast technology is changing and how the needs of our schools are changing between now and even 10 years ago, what do you think a school would look like 20 years from now? Or what do you think learning would be? What should it or what will it? Let's go for should, and then we'll go for will.
I feel like I actually wrote about this in my book, and I'm trying to remember exactly what I said. But there's a few components that I would think would be crucial. One would be that schools are community hubs. So what I mean by that is they're places that community entities and parents gather to better the community, and not just gather to rally around students. So schools are an agent of social change within their communities, and not just with the students they serve. That would be one way that I would like to see them change. Open almost 24 hours a day. I mean, this kind of just this learning hub, this resource hub, this service hub for communities. And then another piece of that is that they are, if I say they're agents for social change in their communities, they're also not only learning hubs, but they're places where kids learn how to give back and contribute to their community. So there's a big push about project-based learning right now, and that could just be another buzzword or another initiative. But I think that the heart of project-based learning is not just student engagement, but it's also that it's for a greater purpose. And so what I know about students is my students who shake their labels, if their labels are that they're gangbangers or that they're promiscuous or that they're drug users or that they're underachievers, whatever that label is that they come to high school with, the only students that really seem to shake that are students who are assigned a different label. And so if those students are students who become builders of tiny houses or, people who are bloggers or whatever that project is that they get passionate about and notoriety for, they can succeed in changing their label and finding that thing. And what I find is that contributing beyond yourself is one of the ways that people feel fulfilled, even as teenagers, when they may have not a lot else going for them in life. Some of my hardest students are my best students with historically underserved populations or young children or disabled people. They're the most empathetic, most caring in those situations. And so I think finding ways that our students can contribute is another thing that schools should be doing in 20 years, not just learning for the gaining of skills and knowledge, but learning for a real purpose in real time for an authentic audience that they know, like their own communities. I think that's the other
making it relevant to them and something they can actually care about. Yeah. Oh, there's so many good things there. I heard a few different things that I'd like to expand on. First, I think I'd like to hear a little bit more about this labeling idea. Mm-hmm. And I know personally I've had some thoughts and experiences about how labels, perceived to be good or bad labels, being called smart or stupid, are both things that can really change the way a young person or even an adult really thinks of themselves. Mm-hmm. Do you have a story or an example of? Yeah, I
have a handful. I have lots of them, but a really good example would be that when I arrived as the curriculum assistant principal, there were so many slots available for advanced classes for incoming freshmen. So we'd say to 8th grade teachers, all right, we need to fill 4 sections worth of advanced classes. So give me the names of 100 students that should take advanced language arts, and then we'll fill those slots. As opposed to who are students that are capable of being advanced, and we'll create that many sections for them. And there's lots of reasons why we did that. I mean, systems, especially, now that I run the master schedule, I know how complex that is and how difficult it is when you don't have some tight structures in it. But one summer I just said, you know what, what if I just look at students' proficiency levels in language arts based on lots of things, their grade, their assessment scores and teacher feedback. And I just dump some more kids in. I create some more sections. I just dump some. What would happen to those students who used to not be advanced students and who were placed in advanced class? Well, the interesting thing that we found was the students who were considered middle of the road students in middle school, who were put into an advanced class their freshman year, outperformed the students who were advanced students already. It was just a strange phenomenon that happened. And I imagine, when I'm picturing what was going on over the course of that year, is the excitement at hearing that you have this gift or this potential or this ability, and then the eagerness to live up to that excitement. And so there's that piece. There's also a few students who were, one was special ed, extreme behavior problem. When I was an instructional coach, and he was just super hard to manage, and the teacher was at her wit's end, and she tried every behavior management thing she could, and so I just said, well, let's just stick him in with the super advanced class and just see what happens. And he went in there and just towed the line because he was around all these positive influences, and he wasn't bored, and he wasn't stupid. He was just, a struggling learner. And I think that it was enough challenge that it got his mental wiggles out a little bit. I don't know how to put it any differently.
I think that's a great way to put it.
And then another kid who was cussing out her teachers and failing her classes. And I called her into my office. This was a high schooler. And she was like, well, what are you going to do to me? Suspend me. That's fine. I don't mind. Like, I just be home another day. And I said, well, I'm going to put you in AP Psych. What? And so it was a class that had prerequisites that she hadn't fulfilled. And I'd asked her like previously, like, well, what does interest you? And she was interested, ironically enough, in human behavior. And so I put her in that class, and there wasn't another behavior problem that came from her year. So, I mean, those are just examples, I think, of how sometimes when we're dealing with a kid who has struggles, we can spend too much time admiring the problem and try to figure out how to solve the problem. And sometimes, while that's important, we also maybe solving the problem requires turning our head away from the problem and focusing on how can we capitalize on the student's strengths, and how can we acknowledge the student's strengths frequently enough for them to change their own label in their mind. And so that's a big piece of, I think, what we could do more of to help more students.
Absolutely, yeah. And it sounds like you've done some of your own work with actually experimenting with that and seeing what would happen, and had some really great results.
Poor students for action research projects for me.
Oh, I don't think so. It sounds like you've given them the best you had to offer, and that's more than a lot of students get.
I hope so.
Yeah. You know, I am familiar with some formal studies that have been done that have seen similar results, where they tell the teacher about a certain label of what to expect from the students, and the students always live up.
There's a lot of famous ones out there.
Yeah, the students seem to live up pretty consistently to whatever label we give them. Imagine if we gave them a label of important and valued. And
I think that comes back to also an ideal school system in 20 years would be catering to each individual student's strengths somehow. And I don't claim to pretend to know how that would be logistically doable, but that's a place I'd want to send my child to school.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I actually used to work at a project-based learning high school, and there's a long way to go between the idea of project-based learning and what you're describing with this, you know, this living, breathing hub of learning that really lets students dive into meaningful projects.
Yeah, it's no easy task.
No, it's not.
I have teachers that have been dabbling in that for a few years and taking a lot of risks, and there's a lot of struggle for them too, to try to make it relevant and meaningful and engaging, and I applaud them. That's not easy.
And it also has the danger of being contrived. It's easy. It's easy for the idea of a project to outweigh the reality of what really takes to have a project, and the pressures from administration and testing and all these other things.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to shift gears just a little bit here. You mentioned a few minutes ago, or maybe a while ago now, the idea of getting parents involved. And I'd really like to go back to that and think about that for a little while, because I've always believed that parent involvement is key in students' success. If you can't get the parents interested in their kids, it seems like you're fighting a battle that's a lot harder than it should be.
Yeah, definitely.
So if, you know, we're a live radio show here, which means that there could be some parents listening in, and I'm curious, what type of advice, what type of interactions do you think parents should be offering their kids on a consistent basis?
That I don't even pretend to be the person that has the answer to this question. Because
well, you're a parent, though. What do you offer to your own kids?
I come at the answer to this from a lot of different angles, and let me just tell you all my angles so that I can contextualize my response. So, one angle is as a parent myself, and I'm a parent of a biological 9-year-old child. Who, I mean, has been a kid that has been seems to be naturally born, empathetic, sensitive, wants to do the right thing. I'm also a parent of a 9-year-old boy who I adopted through foster care when he was 6 years old, and he he's just an amazing human being and has required a whole different skill set in parenting than my biological child.
Mm-hmm.
I am an administrator who deals with parents on one end of the spectrum who make the phone call for their senior about fixing their grade, and on the other end of the spectrum who call me up and cuss me out if I suspend their child for punching another kid. So I've got this whole gamut of experiences, and what I find to be true, no matter what, even my experience with my son's biological family, who we still take on visits and interact with them, is that despite the fact that they can't care for him, they love him very much. Despite a lot of the parents in our school system skill set, I'm convinced they love their children very much. What I would say unequivocally for parents, no matter what end of the spectrum their kids are on, is that their kids can do hard things, and they should. And as parents, if what we want most is our kids' happiness, that requires for them to sometimes be unhappy in the moment to achieve that long term. And I think too often parents jump in and try to create comfort or happiness for themselves or their kids because it's what we do. I mean, it's what parents, it just feels awful to have a kid who's hurting. It's just not a good feeling. But I also see it from the school system angle, where we also work hard to know your child, and we see your child in relation to this giant community of learners. And if we're concerned that there's a problem, we want to work with you to help resolve that or make it better. And so I would say to parents to assume best intent in the school system, and also to be willing to allow your kid to experience struggle. And that doesn't mean that there aren't times you should advocate strongly for your child. But there's so much that can be gained by being partners with the school. And in my experience, 99.999% of the time, the school wants the exact same thing for your child that you want, which is to be happy and successful in life. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, it definitely is a good start. Yeah, I'm sure we could talk about this subject for hours, but never have a complete answer. So a good start is as best I could hope for.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's really interesting how you're not talking about specific things that a parent should do, like make them get up early or give them a nutritious meal. You're talking about trusting them to be their own person and to take on challenges and allow them to face the struggles of life that we all have to face. And that's a really nice way of understanding the potential of children is much bigger than we a lot of times give them credit for.
And I would say, if I listed specific things, it would be bedtime.
Okay.
And obviously eating healthy is important, but not allowing phones in the room at nighttime. And I know this is sounds trivial, but I would say in almost 20 years in education, those are game changers for student success. They're creators of anxiety and depression and addiction and yeah, exactly, all these things. And so setting up those habits for kids now is more important than I think a lot of parents realize.
Yeah, absolutely. And they sleep better if they're not staring at a phone right up.
I mean, if I only got 3 hours of sleep, I would not be a fun person to work with. And I'm like a socially adjusted person with a lot of self-control. And so we take these 5-year-olds and, allow them to stay up for ungodly hours. And, what do we expect? And so I think there's just some real easy fixes. Easy, I use that term lightly, but there are some things that are real tangible things that should happen now in all households that would be a game changer for their children. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are some great great ideas, and I hope the parents listening are thinking about a bedtime and shutting those phones off at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock or better 7:30.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a break for a couple minutes. I'm going to go ahead and put you on hold, and we're going to listen to a song. We always like to listen to a few songs from our guests, and you picked out a few beforehand. So we're going to play one of those songs, take care of a little station business, and come right back, interviewing Dr. Amy Fast.
This portion of the radio show was deleted due to copyright reasons, but you can tune in to KZSU 90.1 every Friday from 3 to 4.
So we are on the line here with Dr. Amy Fast, and we're coming back for the second half of the segment. Dr. Fast, are you there?
I'm here.
All right. Glad to have you back. Okay. So we've been talking about parents and how they can best support their students. We've been talking about reform and change to the educational community. I want to shift gears a little bit and just talk about your thoughts and understandings about what purpose grading serves in schools.
Oh, goodness. This is such a relevant question right now because our school, this is an area where we struggle. We just went through accreditation last year, and we were kind of off the charts everywhere. I mean, we were told things like, your school culture is abnormally good, and this is rare, and all these things. And then they're like, but your grading practices could be more consistent and more up to date, and those sorts of things. So I've been doing a lot of research into this, and I'm really struggling because I don't know. I'm just going to be super candid. I don't know if I buy the whole proficiency grading thing, because what we talked about earlier is what we currently value in schools is solely academic measures. And so what proficiency grading does is it says, how much have you mastered this curriculum, regardless of your work ethic, your this, your that. And that's great to know, have real clarity around what that percent or what that letter means. I think that's good. But I struggle because if you follow me at all on Twitter, then you'll know that what I think there's a disconnect between what we value and measure in school and what actually leads to success. So until the grades are reflective of what actually leads to success, then the proficiency grading doesn't really matter. So what I mean by that is, if it's true that more so than academic achievement, things like executive functioning and social intelligence and ability to handle stress and frustration tolerance and communication and teamwork and all of these other pieces matter as much as, if not more so, than someone's content knowledge and skill, then why would we solely grade on and report on content knowledge and skill? So I think that the places where they separate out the content knowledge from the other pieces of the puzzle probably are the most accurate reflection of how students are doing. If I was a college admissions officer, I'd want to see the effort grade as much as I'd want to see the skill set grade. The places that I think are really doing it right, and I've just dabbled in looking into this, this model, is the mastery grading that's around the 21st century skill set. So things like that I was talking about before, which is like being a global citizen and having digital and quantitative literacy and being a good communicator. And their transcript is basically a rubric of those things. And as students learn through their subject matter classes, they're actually getting scored in those areas. And this mastery transcript in the end doesn't show an A in science, but it shows a mastery to the extent to which a student has mastered complex problem solving, or the extent to which a student has mastered communicating effectively, or the extent to which a student has mastered digital literacy, those pieces. And I think that is If I was an employer, or if I was a college admissions officer, or if I was a student, that's the place that I would want feedback on. So
yeah. So you're talking about creating a whole person, not just a numerical quantity about their perceived ability to have learned certain.
That's the grading system that most matches my philosophy and what I wrote about in my book.
So I'm curious, I think you have probably a reasonable perspective on this as an administrator. What are some of the barriers for college admissions and transcripts and things like that to be able to actually do something like what you just described?
Well, I mean, if you look at the whole backwards design model, high schools are designed to feed into the workforce or feed into college. And so there's this notion that we can't change our practices until practices on those ends are changed. And then the question is, how do you affect change in those areas? So, I mean, I don't know the ability that we would have to overhaul a grading system that much. I don't even know what that would take at a systems level to get 180 staff members, you know what I mean, to be trained in, buy into all the pieces that it would require, and then all the various places that we send our students to then have them understand what those marks mean and why they're important and why why they matter as much as the traditional transcript or grading scale. And I don't know the answer to that question. That's why you and I do these kind of things that we're doing now.
Right.
To get those ideas out there more, so more people, there's a critical mass of people that creates the tipping point then that is willing to try those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is some work going on with that. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know there's a collection of schools who are actually negotiating with universities and finding a way to be able to put students through high school without having to
read the same thing. I did.
Yeah. So it's exciting time, and it's very possible that some of these problems will start to change into different problems soon enough.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Well, there's never going to be a world without problems, so let's not try to fool ourselves, right?
That's right.
So I have a few more things that I wanted to talk with you about. First, you did mention your tweets, and I've loved your tweets. In fact, that's how I found out about you, and that's how I became interested in wanting to hear more about your ideas. And I have a few of your tweets here that I was hoping I could maybe have you expand on those, since it's hard to tell the whole story in 140 characters or less, right?
Sure, yeah.
The first one, I'm gonna go for it here. You made some comments about the recent State of the Union address, and I'm just gonna throw it out there, and I'd love if you could expand if you feel willing.
Yeah.
So here's your tweet. It said, verbatim, "Nothing in the State of the Union about education. But then again, why would we discuss a national endeavor that has such a massive impact on the future of our country?" Yeah. I think there's a little sarcasm in there, but at the same time, what do you think about that when we have a president who doesn't mention the children?
Yeah, and like, politics aside, I've been disappointed in a lot of State of the Unions that I've witnessed in my adult life. I mean, it's frustrating to me, and I know that I can tend to be idealistic, and I don't mean to oversimplify, but if we're looking at improving entire country, and we're talking a lot about the military and national defense and that ginormous budget and immigration and crime, and I mean, if we're not talking about education as a key means to improving our country, then we have so lost our way. And that's where we come full circle back to how we don't recognize our educators adequately, and we don't fund education adequately. And people will say, well, our country gets more funding than most, and we're still not performing. And our country has way more diversity and way more complexity when it comes to the social factors that we're trying to address through our education system, and the generational poverty that we're faced with, and the inequities that have been institutionalized in our system. And so to just say, well, Finland can do it with less money, so get your act together, education. I mean, I struggle. Let's talk about oversimplifying. I mean, that's an oversimplification. And so it feels as though, and I'm not even saying that this is a debate about federal control or local control, but our government should not give up on our education system as the first means by which we try to improve our country. And when they don't speak about it, that's what it feels like to me. And that's a slap in the face to all of us that are, on the verge of tears going home every day because we care so much about the future of our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a funny thing because saying that we spend the most or a high percentage in the grand scheme on each individual student or per capita spending or however you want to frame that doesn't take into account the amount of leakage that's going into things that aren't directly benefiting students in any way, like testing and textbooks and things like that. I mean, in a world of Wikipedia and the internet, it seems like we would have found ways to not be paying for textbooks anymore or paying much less than we are and things of that nature.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it seems like we've kind of come full circle here talking about the amount of time and energy we invest into our teachers and our schools. And I think that's a really great point that you're kind of making in different ways, the importance of our students and our faculty and all of that. I don't know. I've never met, maybe a few, but for the most part, I've never met a bad person that went into teaching.
Yeah.
People don't generally do that. We know we're sacrificing social stigma and earning potential and a lot of other things to go into this field.
Right.
Why do you think people choose to go in education?
I mean, you have to be a true humanitarian for sure. Everyone that I have worked with over the past almost 20 years I think they've gone into education on a selfish level, and I'm using air quotes there for your listeners, but is to make a difference. I think it is a fulfilling career, and there's something that feels good about giving to others. But ultimately, people go into education because I think anyway that they have hope. They have hope that there's purpose in it, and it's more than just, I'm going to leave at the end of the day feeling like I've contributed, but this can actually work. Like, I can do something with future generations that's going to impact their futures. And that, I think that's a noble thing. I mean, and it's an exhausting thing, it really is.
Absolutely.
And so, especially when the system is not always set up to be as conducive as possible to helping that dream come true. So I really, people always ask me, like, because I wrote the book when I was not an administrator, and now I'm an administrator, and they always ask me, has anything changed? Like, do you ever wish you didn't say anything that you said there? Do you ever? And I feel more convicted now than ever before that we need to take care of our teachers, and that we need to take care of our kids. I mean, I feel as passionate about that as ever. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope there's plenty of other people that feel the same way, because if not, we're in big trouble.
Yeah, that's true.
I think this next tweet I wanted to talk about actually fits in nicely with what you were just saying, talking about teachers in general. And your words, I'll just repeat them for you because you probably haven't memorized all your tweets. There's a lot of them, and they're wonderful.
I don't put as much weight on them as others do. This is feeding my ego pretty well right now.
Well, we all get it once in a while. So you said, find someone who settles for average in teaching, and I'll show you someone who doesn't understand the magnitude of the mission. If you remember to bring your why to the work every day, you'll inevitably bring yourself to the work as well. Your why will sustain and fuel you. And I thought that was especially poignant. And I'm wondering what kind of whys get you up in the morning, or what kind of whys you think really keep teachers dedicated to the long-term endeavor.
Yeah, and I think it really is. When I started talking a lot about the purpose of education, I had thought that there was profound importance of everyone having a common purpose. And I do think that it's important to have an end goal that everyone sees with clarity. But I also think that everyone's individual why can be a little bit different. I worry sometimes that we can strip that why away from teachers by making them think that the why, that their purpose is content mastery, is to help their students be proficient in their content. And I think that's obviously an important piece of education, but that's not a sufficient why for me. It's just not. I mean, I want, and I know I'm a big picture person. I know I'm a more global thinker, but in my perfect world, every teacher would be coming to school with a sense of urgency that we're trying to get our kids out of generational poverty, and we're trying to get them passionate about doing something that matters to them, and we're trying to get them to care about contributing in a meaningful way and giving back and becoming their best self. And that's the kind of why I want teachers waking up with in the morning. And it's my job is to help sustain that why in them and to remind them of it and to keep them excited about that. And that's not an easy job either. But that's what I refer to when I'm talking about the magnitude of the mission. It's more than the mission. It's unfortunately more than the mission that our legislators have laid at the feet of teachers. And that can be defeating sometimes when the purpose you're asked to carry out is less than. And I think that by asking teachers to carry out a purpose that's less than noble, in my mind, we're doing a huge disservice to their intrinsic drive.
Yeah, absolutely. Which it's nice because you're starting to talk back towards your book idea of it's the mission, not the mandate.
That's true.
Defining the purpose of public education.
That's right. That's right. I guess I do have a common theme here.
That's wonderful, though. It's good. If you can stay on that long enough, everybody will hear you.
Here's hoping.
So I wanted to ask you one more thing because we are running low on time now, but I'm curious if you believe or you've seen instances where public education serves to sort of reinforce stereotypes and racial prejudices and how that plays out, or if you have any thoughts about what can be done on the student and parent level to try to alleviate some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of, so we give a student survey every year that asks our students all sorts of things, like how hopeful they are about their futures, to whether they think that they've experienced discrimination in our high school, and how they think that if they think things are equitable, and so a lot of my feelings aren't my feelings, but are gathered from our students' feelings. And when my first year as assistant principal, when we asked students if they'd experienced discrimination, about 50% of them said that they had. And we don't have, we're a diverse population, but we're about 30% Latino, and then our other minority populations are they're not nearly as large, so maybe 1% or so. So we basically are looking at Latino population and a Caucasian population in our school. And the fascinating thing for me was I expected that over the 3 years when we saw all of this happening in the political context in America and what we're seeing on the news and with the Build a Wall and the Black Lives Matter and all of the controversy around race in this country, I would have expected to see that this became a much more prominent issue in our school. And the irony, I think this is a good thing that happened, is that we went from 50% of our students saying that they had experienced some sort of discrimination over the 4 years they've been in our high school to like 20% of our students. And so, and that same result happened with them feeling that our school, there was equity in our school. And so I try to rack my brain for like, what happened? What what changed to, when the political climate is so messed up in our country, how are our students feeling more united? And we had a few years ago, we had a walkout. There was a neighboring high school that a student had hung up a sign that said "Build a wall." There was some chatter on social media amongst our students, and some chatter that students just did not find appropriate and wanted to stand up against. And so they organized a walkout, and half of our student body left and marched to the district office. And what our superintendent did was she brought out a microphone in the sound system, and she gave it to the students, and she let them hold a rally.
What an empowering situation.
Yeah. And then about a month later, we had a voices panel, and our voices panels where students of all different walks of life get behind the curtain in our auditorium, and they tell their story. And not only do students tell their story, but teachers tell their story too. So like last year, for example, we had one of our teachers who's Muslim tell her story, and she's a computer science teacher, and she got really vulnerable and cried, and every time someone tells their story at the voices panel, they walk out then in front of the whole student body to standing ovation. So there's this risk taking that is a part of our culture that allows for vulnerability and storytelling. And I think the willingness to share our stories with each other, and the willingness to get vulnerable and to highlight places where we aren't doing good enough and open that dialogue is what is making our school better in this area. Certainly not good enough yet, but I think places that shy away from doing that hard, messy work is where it just continually gets worse.
Absolutely. And that's such a great way for us to end. Thank you so much for coming on today. You've been a wonderful guest. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your ideas here on the Modern Education Radio Hour. And again, this is Dr. Amy Fast. She's the author of the book, It's the Mission, Not the Mandates, Defining the Purpose of Public Education. So if you want to hear more of her ideas, you could check out the book. Thanks again for coming on, and I'm going to play one more of your favorite songs that you suggested as we play out of here. So
thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. This is Dr. Amy Fast here on the Modern Education Radio Hour. I'm your host, Ben Woodford, and we are going to play one song on the way out of here.